I think we should probably just reveal the car at this point. Gentlemen, if you would kindly... And there you have it.
Let's welcome to the stage now the creative director for Universal Studios, John Murdy. Writer and producer of Back to the Future, Bob Gale. Delorean restorer, Joe Walser. And the director of Out of Time, Saving the DeLorean, Steve Concatelli. Ladies and gentlemen, everybody. Wow, boy, I just would love to drive that thing off this lot here. Look how beautiful. That is like the A car, ladies and gentlemen. This is the car, and it's right here in Los Angeles, just a couple miles from the space shuttle. That's pretty darn cool. Well, I just want to start off, before we get into the restoration of the car, we wouldn't be here without the car itself, without these films, without this movie, which opened on July 2nd, 1985. And I guess the first question, and I'm sure maybe you all have the same answer or have different answers, what is it really about Back to the Future that people love it so much, why it has endured, why it has inspired people to build their own DeLoreans?
I think the power of Back to the Future, the fact that it's lasted all these years and that generations keep watching it. The movie captures a moment that every human being has, which is at some point when you're a kid, you're 7, 8, 9 years old, and you suddenly understand, my parents once were kids. That's a huge, gigantic, cosmic idea. And if you think about it even more, and you think about the fact that in order for you to get here, your parents had to do the dirty. So it touches everybody in a way that is very accessible. And the fact that we also created this really cool car doesn't hurt.
The amazing thing about the DeLorean is that it is a character. It is a character that when you get to the third movie and the train pulverizes the DeLorean on the tracks, like everybody in the audience thought it was like when Spock died in Wrath of Khan. It was like, oh my gosh. But what is it about this car that people just have such an attachment to it, just like they have an attachment to Doc and Marty?
Well, it is the coolest car, in the world. But who wouldn't want to jump in? And there's so many reasons you might want to go back in time and speak louder. So, what I was saying is the car is the coolest car in the world. And the fact that it time travels just makes it cooler.
Well, actually, it didn't start off as a car. It started off as something else, the time machine. It was going to be something else, and then it changed. What happened?
It was... Tested. Hello. Okay. The time machine was originally a time chamber that was built out of a refrigerator, and Doc had to haul it around on the back of his pickup truck. And when Bob Zemeckis and I were in pre-production, and suddenly we start having to think about this in terms of actually filming the stuff instead of writing it. Bob came in the office one day and he said, Bob, messing around with this refrigerator, getting it on the truck, getting it off the truck, wouldn't it be better if the whole thing, if Doc built the time machine into a car? Then we don't have to do that. And I say, yeah, you're right. And then he said, and what if the car was a fucking DeLorean? Why a DeLorean? Because this was the summer of 1984, John DeLorean was on trial. And so the DeLoreans were not being made anymore, but because the DeLorean now had this sort of really interesting sort of counterculture, edgy aspect to it, that made it even cooler. And of course, look at those gull-wing doors. I mean, come on. If we're gonna do a gag where somebody from the past looks at a car of the 80s and thinks that it's from outer space, there it is. So we have the greatness of Bob Zemeckis to thank for coming up with the idea of doing it in a DeLorean.
Well, Steve and Joe, I want to ask you about how this car has inspired people to build their own DeLoreans. I mean, it's one thing if you have a model of the Millennium Falcon or a model of the Starship Enterprise, which both are very cool, and I do have both of those things. But people made their own DeLoreans that they drive around. I mean, like, what made it so special that they
For
wanted
sure,
to do that?
I wouldn't have done it if it was a refrigerator. It's not that cool. Not as cool. It would have been cool, I'm sure. But yeah, I remember the first time when I saw Back to the Future, I actually wasn't into cars at all. I didn't know anything about DeLoreans, and I didn't even know they were like a real car. I thought it was just made up for the movie. And then years later, you know, I saw a video or an ad or something, and I was like, wait, what? It's a real car? I was like, now I know what I have to do.
Well, I think, is this working? Almost. I think one of the things that inspires the fans, I mean, Joe has built two of what I consider the best replicas around, but it's just that it has such a realistic quality to it. You know, it's a DeLorean and you can really get one, and as soon as you put the vents on it, everybody on the street points and says, that's a time machine. And there's something about owning a piece of that, and I know there's a couple of the members of the restoration team in the crowd who own DeLoreans that are time machines, and everywhere they go, it's a parade. And there's just something about the love of Back to the Future and representing that and being an ambassador that appeals to fans.
You know, Bob, I want to ask, what was it like the first time Steven Spielberg, Robert Zemeckis, Christopher Lloyd, and of course Michael J. Fox, like, do you remember what it was like for them the first time they saw the A car, the time machine?
Well, they had the exact same reaction that everybody here had when you guys first saw it, because you read about it in the script, but then when you see it, and one of the things that we insisted on in creating the car, it's not, you know, it doesn't have this sort of machined look to it, because we thought about what it reflects the character of the guy who invented it, Doc Brown. And for anybody that tinkers around in their garage and is putting stuff together, or in their basement, whatever, you're in a hurry to find out if it works, you know? So the wires are all exposed. Doc didn't have time to put housing on it. This thing looks like it could explode. And that's one of the things that makes it cool. So when everybody sees it, and that's the reaction that I mean, Michael said, I get to drive this? No, it's not the best driving car. It's not a performance car, but it's the movies.
Let's see if you bastards can do 90.
The actual stock speedometer of the DeLorean doesn't go up that high.
And neither do the cars.
Well, when it came to the restoration, what led to the restoration? And I mean, Back to the Future is as much of a crown jewel for Universal Studios as E.T. and definitely now Harry Potter. I mean, check out Universal Studios right now; it's pretty amazing. But what led to the restoration? How did you know that this was the A car?
Yeah, I mean, you know, back in the old days, when movies were completed, a lot of times they would give props or set pieces and things like that to the theme park to have it on display. And we didn't really know that it was, because there's multiple cars used for the film, we didn't know that it was the A car. And actually, I think, Joe, you could probably explain better than anybody, like, how Industrial Light and Magic labeled the car.
Yeah, there were a lot of parts in the car that were actually scribed, like
A
one,
on
it was like one of A, two of A, and in actually more places than we knew about. We found several that we didn't know about. The most obvious one is the little letter A sharpied just inside the driver's side door, and you can actually see that in part 2. And yeah, it's
Yeah,
awesome.
And when we had the Back to the Future ride, the car used to be out in front of the ride. So for much of its history, the car was outside. And whenever you work around movies, one thing you really quickly learn about movies is when you build things for a movie, you don't build them to last forever. We still have the Psycho House on the Universal backlot. Earlier this year, we just restored it. That's been around for years, and they're not built to be put on display outside. So the car needed to be restored. I just happened to be walking down a hall one day in Universal, and I overheard a conversation going on in an office, and I kind of poked my head in, and I'm like, are you talking about the DeLorean? Because I have a really weird connection to this film. I grew up in Whittier, California. I still live in Whittier, where they filmed Back to the Future. I worked at the Point Hills Mall the year that they were filming. In Back to the Future, if you guys know what I'm talking about, the time you first see the car, that's the parking lot of the Point Hills Mall in the City of Industry, Hacienda Heights. I worked in the toy store there, so I crashed his set when I was in high school, and I watched them film these scenes. When I started at Universal in 1989 as a tour guide, we were making Back to the Future Part 2, and I hung out on the set of that movie, and I kind of learned a lot of what I know about filmmaking from watching people like Bob and Robert Zemeckis making those films. So I have a long, long history for the film, so I immediately stuck my head in this office and I said, I want to be involved. Whatever we do, I want to be involved. And I think it was Bob's recommendation to get Joe involved. And at first I was like, the fans that built these replica cars, but he was absolutely right, because what they brought to the project, and documented so well in Steve's film, is passion. And once we started talking, I was like, and I'm kind of the unofficial studio historian for Universal, and I thought I knew a lot about Back to the Future. And these guys' knowledge blew me away at how much they knew about not only the movies, but the car itself. So once we all met about it, we knew that the car needed to be restored by the very people who had the most love for the film franchise, which is the fans.
That's heavy. I really do love this the circle of life, so to speak, with the DeLorean. That the films and the car inspired so many people to build their own cars, and now these fans, full of so much passion and love for the series, we're now returning the favor by restoring the A car, which is right here, ladies and gentlemen. And Steve, I just want to talk about, and definitely Joe, where did you begin? Like, what was step one?
That is a long question.
Loaded question.
That's a long way back. Step one on the whole journey?
No. Step one, like, okay, you got the car. It's like, you're looking at it going like, okay, where do you start?
What do you mean, this car?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. The first thing we did was look at each other and say,
what did we agree to?
Yeah, this is a much bigger job than we expected. And we knew what we were getting into. We thought we knew, but we didn't know. It was bad. So the first thing we did was take every single piece off the car, whether it was the stock DeLorean parts or the time machine parts, and we photographed them, cataloged them, and we came up with a plan. Restoring a lot of parts take probably longer than we had. So, but we had a lot of guys and equally passionate about the job, and we just kung fu'd it.
Yeah, Joe, he actually makes it sound almost easier than it was, because the restoration was a year-long, frame-off, ground-up restoration. Joe got the car, yeah, this was down to just the frame, and they even took the wheels off. It didn't even look like a DeLorean. And you sit there, and you see it in that state, and your first reaction is this.
I hope it goes back together.
Yeah, like, oh my God, I hope we can put this back together, because Universal and Bob and millions of fans across the world are counting on that.
It was a lot of pressure.
It was a ton of pressure, especially on Joe, but Joe had a team of about 24 guys, the best DeLorean builders and time machine builders in the world, and from all over the planet coming
And
to
they
Los
were
Angeles.
insane.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys were crazy.
I have the emails to prove it.
Yeah.
Which was one of the reasons that I knew it had to be a fan-based project, because every wire, every bolt on that car is accurate. And these guys lost sleep trying to make sure that they replicated stuff. They contacted some of the original people that worked on the car. Chaffee, stand up. This is Michael
There he
Chaffee. One of the reasons that the car looks as cool as it is because of all the work that Michael put into it. But I know there were moments when Joe would contact Michael, and Michael said, "I don't know," and say they were going to get it perfectly done. It was almost like religious fanaticism that they had to get it right, and they did.
And also, what I would add to that, Bob, is the goal was to get it back to screen condition, which means how it looked when Industrial Light and Magic turned over the car to the production. But they didn't stop there. I mean, the car does things, and you guys can probably talk a little bit about this. The car does so many more things than it ever did in the movie.
ILM did not do that. The ILM built the miniatures and stuff and did the effects, but the car was built here in LA. But the time circuits, the sounds that everything makes, when we shot that stuff, it didn't do all that. The time circuits to light them up, we had to have a guy off camera. If you push the buttons on the keypad, it didn't do anything. But this car does. You can input the time, the calendar dates. It makes all those noises. You turn the switch, it makes all those noises. It's all sound effects when we did it, but we had the best guys in the world working on this thing to make it as great as it could possibly be.
Why? I mean, you could have just gone for the look, but you went for the sound too. You went for every button to have a function, to make a sound. What made you go I wouldn't say the extra mile, but you went the extra gigawatt. Thank you. You went the extra gigawatt.
There's a couple of reasons, but mostly I felt like I owed it to the fans, to everybody. This was mine and the team's way of giving back to a movie that gave us so much for so long, and this was kind of us giving back, and we didn't want to do it half-ass. We wanted, I asked the team. Well, they asked me what do you wanted to do, and I was like, everything. It was a lot.
And it does.
Listen, I'm actually going to just go out on a limb and say that if we actually took that thing to 88 miles per hour, able to go back in time.
That was the running joke on the restoration team. They said that Joe took this project so serious, it was as if he expected the time machine to actually function.
Yeah, but you don't know if it does.
Yeah.
No plutonium.
So,
Anymore.
when they were finished, you know, for both of you guys, when you saw the restoration complete, like, what did that feel like?
Really proud, because, you know, I think when you work in a movie studio, the temptation is to take for granted how important these films are to the fan community. I was looking it up today, you know, just box office, you know, in the entire history of Universal Pictures, which is an over 100-year film history, you know, Back to the Future is still in the top 20, just domestic box office all time. That's after all the Fast and the Furious movies and all the, you know, Jurassic Park movies, and that's not adjusted for inflation or anything. That's just how big of a hit this movie was. It was the #1 movie of the entire year back in 1985 when it was released. But even more importantly, it lives on and lives on, and from generation to generation to generation. And you meet so many people who just to be able to see the real car in person is such, and that's why a lot of you are here tonight. You know, it's a huge, huge honor for all of us that got to work on this project to take something that is, you know, one of the great icons of all of movie history and bring it back to life so that the fans can enjoy it for years and years and years to come.
How about you, Bob? What was it like for you when you first saw it?
Well, it was similar to when I first saw the finished car on the set. Remember, I'd been watching it being built, but the fact that it actually did all this stuff that the car in the movie didn't actually do. It was like the movie was right there in front of me. I was totally blown away, and it was just a fantastic moment to know that, all right, it's beautiful, it's perfect, and it's going to be around for a long time.
How many of you went on October 21st to rewatch the 3 films on the big screen? All right, we have the best crowd here today. You know what? Yeah, I stayed up through till the end. You know, like the next morning, I was driving to work and I stopped off at Starbucks on the corner of Franklin and Highland. You know, where all the homeless people hang out. And I'm in line and this guy's wearing a heavy vest. So I said, "Hey kid, what's with the life preserver?" And he's looking at me like, forget it. But you know, one thing I noticed at the screenings was that there were a lot of kids running around with Back to the Future t-shirts, and that hat. I mean, that happened Back to the Future too. I saw somebody wearing a t-shirt that says Jaws 19. This time it's really, really personal. What is it like for Bob and John, you know, the legacy of Universal Studios that it's like crossing over into generations, just like the Star Wars movies have done?
It goes to what I said earlier about the fact that it captures that human moment, and kids get that. Even though they don't understand every joke, they may not understand every reference. It's Back to the Future, it's a human story. And the movies that live on are always about characters. And so many movies that live on are also family stories. And so this, you know, I got one of the best casts you can imagine. And you can watch Back to the Future over and over again because you love watching Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd and Leah and Crispin Glover and Tom Wilson. Everybody knows who those characters are. They can identify with those characters. Everybody's been picked on by a bully. Everybody wants to knock the bully down on his ass. And everybody wishes they could travel through time and go find out what we're did my parents actually do that, or were they just handing me a whole bunch of crap all my life?
He's a peeping Tom. How about, John, for the decision to, like you said, when the car was on display, it was outside in front of the ride, and now it's here at the Petersen. Why is this the perfect place for the A car, Time Machine Delorean?
Well, we had the car after Joe and the team restored it. We had the car on display indoors at Universal, but as you mentioned kind of at the beginning, we've got a lot of stuff going on right now. It's 75% of the park has changed, not only with Harry Potter, but it's just going through this epic transformation right now. The facility where we had the car on display is no longer there. So I remember emailing Bob and Joe and saying, the car is not going back outside. So, no matter what happens, it's not going back outside. The work you guys did was so amazing. We got to make sure that it's preserved for all time.
And it took longer to restore the car than it did to make it the first time. But that's, if any of you have ever remodeled a house, it's the same story. To remodel a house, to restore a house, always takes longer than you're halfway through and you say, why didn't I tear this damn thing down and start from the beginning? But because it was the real car, that option wasn't open. So it's kind of interesting that it took longer, probably 3 or 4 times longer to restore the car than it did to make it.
Because I was just going to say, I believe the original car took about 10 weeks to build for the film.
Yeah, 10 or 12 weeks.
Yeah, and to answer her question, Joe said it took a year, but when he says it took a year, he meant that there were about 24 guys working full time, including weekends, for an entire year to get the car looking like this. And that's, and it was insane to watch. So he's downplaying it, and I just want to point out that they had the deadline, and Joe was determined to make that deadline, and Joe proudly finished the car 4 hours before Universal came to pick it up.
4 hours. That's
So
awesome.
they made it. It was 3 in the morning, and they picked it up at 7. And out of time is a theme that ran through this entire restoration.
Instead, there's a backstory about Mr. Fusion.
Yeah, one of the things in making the film and documenting Joe and the restoration team, back in the day, some of you may have gone to Universal Studios in the late 90s and noticed that the Mr. Fusion that was on the car looked a little different than you remember. And what happened was, at one point, Mr. Fusion had gone missing. It had either been misplaced or somebody, an eager fan maybe took it home as a souvenir. And so they had to replicate it. And so one of the in-house teams built a Mr. Fusion that put on the car, and it was about, what would you say it was, like
9 feet tall.
Yeah, it was like 9 feet tall, and it looked like a giant stovepipe. And it sat on the car for quite a while, and that was fine, but what happened is, during the same time, Sunstar came to take photos for their 1/18 scale replica, I believe, and they took photos of that on the car, and that's what ended up on the Sunstar models. And so we say that they made a very, very accurate version of a very inaccurate prop. But thankfully, once they found out, they did go back, they changed it, put the right Mr. Fusion on, and now there is no Mr. Fusion on because they went with the nuclear reactor style.
Who else? Yes, you have a question.
Was there some secrecy around the restoration, and where did you do it?
Was there secrecy around the
Yes.
restoration? Where did you do it?
We did it at a secret location. No, we really did. I mean, we did it. It was done in a property that we have that's secret, so I can't tell you. But it was all, and that made it very difficult for these guys because they couldn't just take it, home to Joe's house or something and do it in his backyard. Plus, insurance considerations and all that. So it had to be done at a specific facility, and they had to come to that facility to do the work, and they could only work at that facility when they were working on the car.
And it was really far away.
Yeah, it's really far away. But it's secret.
This question for Bob. I've heard a rumor that you had been asked to consider a different car for the time machine.
Yeah, not a rumor. It's a good story. I'll tell it every day. Back to the Future. All 3 of the movies, well, 1 and 2 really, not 3. We have a lot of product placement. Product placement is when you're going to have somebody drink a soft drink, is it going to be Coke or is it going to be Pepsi? And the soda companies will give you free soda or pay for you using their brand. So one of the things that we did with the Back to the Future movies, to create a time period, you want to use brand names and brands that evoke the time period. So the Texaco logo changed over 30 years, so that was a much better choice than Shell, whose logo didn't change. And Pepsi was a much better choice than Coke, because Pepsi's logo changed. And Universal hired a product placement guy, who was a little bit sleazy, to come and pitch us different products to put in the movie. And one day, and we would get money for that, obviously, well, which is, and he would take half of whatever money he could drum up. Pretty steep, bad guy. Anyway, he comes into my office one day with the woman from Universal, and he says, I've got a product placement opportunity, Bob, that will give the production $75,000. I said, okay, Richard, I'm listening. The movie was costing $40,000 to $50,000 a day to shoot back then. So this is a day and a half's worth of shooting. Okay, I'll listen to that. He said, if you change the Delorean to a Ford Mustang, Ford will pay, you'll get $75,000 from Ford. And I looked right at him and I said, Richard, Doc Brown doesn't drive a fucking Mustang.
Never gets old. Yes, sorry, you had a question.
I have a question for Bob and anyone else. Showcasing the model here and more so to other sound nerds, the sound effects of the car are almost as iconic as the car itself. And I just wonder, Bob, when you first heard the sound effects, is that what you had pictured on set? Because you mentioned you didn't hear any sounds when you were
Right, I
there.
did.
Does anyone else have comments on the sound?
We weren't really thinking about what the sounds were going to be, because when you're shooting a movie, you want to get the work done. You know, you only have so many hours to shoot. You want to get the shots. We had Charles Campbell, Chuck Campbell, was our supervising sound editor, and Bob and I had worked with him on our previous movies. Chuck was a genius at sound. He always came up with really, when you hire the best people, they come up with things that you would have never thought of. I mean, one of my favorite sound effects in Back to the Future, separate and apart from the sounds that these guys, he and his guys created for the Delorean, which are fantastic, but the little details, George McFly's shoes squeak in the 50s, if you listen real carefully. But my favorite gag is at the when Doc drops Marty off in 1985, and the car takes off down the street, you hear the explodes, you hear a distant dog barking. You know, it's like, wow, yes, of course. So if there was an explosion like that, we'd hear dogs barking. So it was Chuck Campbell and his crew that came up with this stuff, and they previewed the sound effects, and Bob and I would listen to stuff, and say, when you turn loose the best guys in the world, whether they're car restorers like this guy, or sound effects guys, whoever, they're going to come up with some great stuff.
Wow. Yes, you, right there. Yeah.
My question is for Steve and Joe. How did you guys connect with the documentary? Like, how did that come up?
How did you guys connect to the documentary?
Well, Joe, I had known Joe, we had known each other for several years, and Joe, you know, I won't go into the whole story, but he was building his first replica, and he showed me pictures, and I said, I have got to meet you. So we got to know each other, got to be friends, but as far as, you know, Joe had been hired by them to do the restoration, and then as far as my involvement, when I found out Joe got the project, I said, Joe, I've got to help you restore the time machine. He goes, great. Can you fix a car? I said, no. He goes, do you know anything about props? I said, no. Yep. Do you do electronics? No. Welding? No. And he just looks at me and goes, what the hell can you do? And I said, I can film it. And that became my official job. So while Joe and the team worked on the car, my job was to not touch it and to film all of them restoring the car, which I could then turn into a movie, which the full-length feature version comes out this summer. Yes.
You're in the back, yes.
Although I'm sure it's priceless to most of us, and insurance companies are usually pretty eager to put a value on it, what is the assessed value of this?
It's priceless. It's a time machine. Got a question right there, yes. Yeah.
This one's for Bob. I'm curious, this goes way back, before the movie came out. How did Universal, for example, come across the car before it was converted? How did you come across it or find in 5261 before there was Craigslist and eBay and all that stuff?
Question is, how do we come across these DeLoreans? Is that right?
Back then.
Back then, well, it wasn't that hard. You know, you buy a used car. I mean, you look at the want ads, you make a few phone calls. It was pretty easy to buy. We bought 3 DeLoreans for the first movie, and then when we found out we were making the second one, we bought 3 more. And even then, they were pretty easy to find and buy.
Yes.
All legal.
So, along with that, where are all those other cars now?
That's a good question. Where are all the other cars? You got them.
Let's see. For the first film, there were 3 cars. The A car, which was the hero car, and it's there. The B car, which was a lot like it, but it was actually the car that was hit by the train in the end of part 3, so it's nowhere.
Or it's everywhere.
Or everywhere.
So the time displays from that car are sitting on my fireplace mantle.
And the C car was just half a car, and it was just, they were done with it. It was dismantled. It doesn't exist anymore. Then for part 2 and 3, there were 2 more DeLoreans that were converted into the off-roader style with the white walls. And one of those is owned privately now. And the other one is Universal Japan on display in front of the ride.
Who has the train?
The miniature train is in the Universal Archive, actually. We've had it in display in the park. So that's in Universal's archives and collections, along with some other props in Back to the Future movies.
There's a couple more cars.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
The big train is in Florida.
Yeah, the miniature train is the one we have in our archive.
There was another car it's referred to as the Oxnard car because it did the Papa Wheelie actually in front of the train. That was a totally different car, and that car is at Universal Florida. And the other one was fiberglass, and I think that was just dismantled.
Yeah, the fiberglass car was designed so that we could hang it from a wire, so when the car is actually flying, it's that car. If it's not a miniature.
Yeah, but that question, how many cars, is actually a whole rabbit hole that you could fall down forever when it came to the restoration, because over the years, parts had been swapped among all these cars. And so Joe and his team had to go through and CSI forensic analysis. That red capacitor went to the B car in '95 and then went here, and these parts got swapped. And so they had to do all this research, which is a lot of that year process, in gathering all these original A car parts back to get them back on the original car. And those cars are spread all over the world, and they had to go through and find out, oh, that's that piece, go get it.
And I had to send the emails to get them for them. Because, yeah, we had to get parts from the Florida car that were original to the first film and have them replaced and all that stuff. So.
What would happen while we were shooting is that something would break on one car, or a door panel or a fender would get dented, and we didn't have time to fix it. So what we would do is we'd cannibalize the part off of another car. So that's how there were a lot of mismatch. I think they weren't mismatched, everything fit, but
It was really hard to keep track of all those changes. But actually, you just asked about the Planet Hollywood car. There was a car on display on the roof of Planet Hollywood, and that actually is the B car technically that got hit by the train. But it's not a real DeLorean at this point. It's just the panels welded together. But it is real. Also, there was an audio question or something I wanted to add to it, and that is when we did the electronics and the sound effects for the car, you know, we didn't just like rip those sounds from a Blu-ray, you know. We got them from Universal. They're the original audio tracks for the film.
So I think when they were doing the Blu-ray and everything, you know, when they're restoring the audio for home video and home entertainment, those source material is more easily defined because of things like that than it would be, because source material for films tends to literally live in an abandoned mine shaft somewhere, because that's typically where they still store film elements. It's old mines way down the, you know, way below the Earth's surface, because the atmospheric conditions are really good for preserving those elements. So when you're trying to find original film elements, it's really difficult. But luckily, because of the popularity of the film and all the home entertainment releases, we were able to get them. So.
Yes, you.
Where was the original car built and by whom?
Where was the original car built? The original, this
car.
original car that is right here at the Petersen.
Yes.
Originally, where was it built?
mine was in North Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a shop in North Hollywood called Film Tricks.
Company called Film Tricks, they had a shop in North Hollywood.
Right here.
Is this car a composite of different year DeLoreans, or is it a single year DeLorean?
Is this car a composite of different DeLoreans or a single year
No,
DeLorean?
this is a 1981. It's not a composite. It's just one year.
Right there, man, you, yes.
This particular car, the exposed cables and wires, are they actually functioning, or are they just there for show?
I thought about making them functional. But they're not.
Prove it.
That was
Yes.
probably a wise decision.
Yeah, the beard, yes, you, the black shirt. Right there.
Can you briefly tell us what exactly is the, how do you restore a car? How do you restore that?
How do you restore a car? That, we'll be here all night.
Start with an easy question. Honestly, there's no one way. It depends on the part. It depends on the damage. You know, we did the best we could with what there was. You know, we tried as hard as we could to fix up, or, you know, we didn't want to replace anything. So, for example, the rear quarter panels had a lot of extra holes drilled in them for some reason. And there was, you know, we stressed over everything. But that in particular, we had a long debate about whether or not we should fix it, because you can actually see those holes in part 2 and 3. So they're like screen-used holes. But I argued, you know, that we were restoring it to, you know, the state that it, you know, when you first saw it, when it rolled off of Doc Brown's truck, that was the car we were working on, and that's why it doesn't have a Mr. Fusion. And, you know, for that, it was a lot of work. So we had a stainless steel welder come out and fill the holes, and We had a lot of people saying it can't be done. You'll never be able to do it so that you can't see where the holes were. And you know, so I basically sat on my butt for a week and fixed it.
I remember one of the things that was the most work was just the body, the stainless steel body, because you think about it being out in front of an attraction, and you know, while you know it's cordoned off and everything, inevitably people are going to try to take a picture with it and lean on it. So there was so many dents and dings that these guys had to get out of that body, and I remember that being quite a bit of work.
And I was going to say, if you're interested in knowing exactly how to restore the time machine, I encourage you to get the movie Out of Time, which is exactly the movie that we made. No, but the film actually answers exactly that question: is how do you restore a time machine? What is the process? And I'll just be very brief. But the documentary that I made about Joe and the team is a full-length doc about exactly that: the entire process from the beginning, all the rough parts, all the very rough parts, and then through to the end. So we show you the entire process of how they did it and just how much work actually went into it. And the film will come out July.
Got time for a few more questions, because then we got to make like a tree and... Right, yes, right here. Love it. You all love these movies. It's great.
This is switch on. Okay. This is for Bob. At what point did you realize that not just the car, but the movie would be something that would transcend time and trend and would be something people would be talking about at this extent 30 years later?
Yeah, like what was the moment that you went?
Yesterday.
Oh, yesterday.
Well, we knew the movie was a hit when we made the cover of Mad Magazine. That was step number one. That
What did they call it? You remember? Like Blessed to the Future or something?
yeah, probably that was probably Blessed to the Future. Yeah. And yes, Alfred E. Newman trying to hitch a ride on the DeLorean. Pretty cool. So that was where we knew the movie was a hit, and was making some cultural inroads, and of course the fact that Universal said, well, we want to make another one, and then I don't really know. It's just that these things, they would just keep running them on TV. People would keep on watching them. The ride was real popular at both Florida and here, and then Japan, which they're closing it, unfortunately. So there was not one particular moment. It was more like, wow, people still care about these movies. How cool is that? And then, of course, the amount of love that we felt on October 21st and everything leading up to it, that was absolutely off the charts. When the neighbor kids would find out that I worked on Back to the Future, I had something to do with it, and they'd, knock on my door and ask me if I had any posters or props or anything. I said, wow, okay. Come on in, kid.
Two more questions. How about right over here? Yes, you.
Okay, sorry. During the restoration process, was there anything little detail that surprised you? You're like, oh, I never noticed that before.
Probably not.
Well, I don't want to speak for Joe, but the time circuits, how they appear in the movie, and the challenge of making them appear in reality.
Right, but that didn't surprise me.
I take it back.
Honestly, finding the little A's all over was probably the coolest Easter egg that I didn't know.
You knew that it was the A car.
Yeah, well, we would, take a part off and.
Yeah, you can see the little A.
Oh yeah.
Point it out.
But we would take a part off or a panel, and on the back, it was, scribed. That was cool.
Was there a function or an element that didn't
not make the cut for the time machine? And will there be a function that we might see in the future at the time machine?
No, there will not be a Back to the Future Part 4.
Yes! Nice try, well Shane.
It is what it is. And at a certain point when you're making the movie, you have to say, okay, we got to shoot it. There may have been some other doodads that might have been on the machine, but the point of it all is to tell the story. And the story is told by the fact that we have the flux capacitor and the time circuits and the time coils, and actually in terms of the thinking behind what the car was going to look like, those vents that are on the back, if you think about a nuclear reactor, you know that, the 3 Mile Island or any nuclear plant, they got those big cooling towers. That's what those things are. So it was all based on what makes sense in the story, what is it supposed to do, and then the magic of everybody else coming there and saying, okay, this guy Doc Brown, he built this thing in his garage, and it's got to look, like I said before, it's got to look like that, and it does. So the time machine, the DeLorean time machine is perfect. There's nothing more we need. There's nothing too much. It's history.
All right, before you guys wrap up, I just wanted to say one thing. My name is Dana Williamson. I'm the collection manager here at the museum. I have gotten to know Joe very well. Just so all you can appreciate this, when I got word the time machine was coming, and it showed up, and I took a look at it, and I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. What an incredible machine. Then I get a call, and they say, Joe and his crew are gonna come, and they're gonna fix it. And I said, what needs fixing? So Joe shows up with his crew. They came early in the morning. They take a look at it. All of a sudden, there are wires everywhere. Everything is all over the place. And I said, what's going on? They said, it's in the museum. Has to be perfect. We want to make it perfect. We'll make it perfect for you. 9 o'clock at night, I said, guys, I got to go home. They said, do you mind if we stay? They stayed through the night. They made this so perfect for every one of you, for all the museum goers to see. So thank you, Joe. Nice job.
I'd like to say thank you to the Petersen Museum. This truly is the best place for the DeLorean time machine to be. I've been coming here since the museum first opened. I've always enjoyed the fact that the love of old cars, the love of movie cars especially. I knew that the car belonged here, and the fact that events came together to make this possible, and to know that everybody in the public who comes here will now be able to enjoy this iconic vehicle. I couldn't be happier about that. So thank you, Petersen.
Before this is over, I just wanted to say that there are actually a few members of the restoration team here tonight, and I couldn't have done this without them. And so maybe you guys could stand up. If you were on the team, stand up. There were a lot more people than that, but they're here.
And I would say, let's hit the road, but ladies and gentlemen, where we're going, we don't need roads. Thank you so much. Enjoy the time machine till the end of time.
Everybody, how about a big round of applause? Come on.